Well, welcome back to all you loyal listeners of Pastor. And if you're here for the first time, thanks for checking us out. In this episode, I'm going to ask Wes to talk about shepherding, and I'm zeroing in on the older saints in the church, maybe those empty nesters and beyond. I'll ask him to interact on how older Christians can finish strong and just what it means to live out the gospel. I hope you find this episode helpful and maybe even a little challenging. Thanks for being here. Let's get started. Well, Wes, my friend, it's good to see you.
It's good to see you too, Rob. I'm excited for another edition of Pastor.
This will be good. Thanks for being here as always. Wes, I want to talk about shepherding. I think we've talked about shepherding in the past here and there, but I don't know if we've done a full episode.
No, I don't think we have, Rob.
And I don't think we're going to get to shepherding in general for this entire podcast. We'll get to some things. Maybe we'll hone in on it a little bit. But let's just start off at the beginning. I wondered if you might just share some of what the key components of a good shepherding ministry look like.
Yeah, that's a great question and really requires a good effort to understand what the scriptures are saying about that. They say a lot about that, both in the Old Testament and the New Testament. But I think when you boil it down, shepherding the flock, the job description of a good shepherd and of a board of shepherds, a leadership team, is primarily preach and teach and counsel and model and do it all again, the gospel. It has to be centered on communicating and modeling and help people living out the gospel. We're taking everything captive to the gospel. And I think that's at the heart. It's not everything shepherds do, but I think it's the heart of what shepherds do. And it's not age specific. It's the same idea. That doesn't mean it's not age adjusted, but it's not like, well, we only do that for this age group. We don't do it for the 5-year-olds. We don't do it for the senior citizens. No, it's the same fundamental thrust. That's what shepherds are called to do. When they're called to shepherd the flock that's among them, they're called primarily to preach and teach and counsel and model and rinse and repeat the gospel.
I understand what it means to preach the gospel. I think I understand what it means to teach the gospel, to counsel the gospel. But you're saying all of that is actually shepherding the gospel. That's what shepherding is?
Yes, although don't leave out the word model, because what Peter says in 1 Peter 5 is that we carry out this role in part not by lording it over the flock, but by setting an example, by being examples among them. And Jesus said, first among you is a servant to all. So that modeling piece, Paul said to Timothy, he said to Titus, be good examples to the flock. We're the pace setters in terms of the very thing that we're trying to help them to do. And in general, what we're trying to help them to do is love God with all their heart and love their neighbor as themselves. Particularly on that second one, he said to Timothy, the goal of our instruction is love from a sincere faith, a good conscience, and a pure heart. So we're trying to help people to love, and they in turn then are loving one another. And the Bible says in Ephesians 4, that's how they're building the body up in love. As they love one another, the body is built up in love. So I think that's primary in my mind.
So you said, don't forget the word model.
Yes.
When you say model, you're saying set an example.
Set an example. That's right.
So here's what I'm curious about, Wes. We can maybe go back before we go forward, but you're not 35 anymore.
I'm 36, you're right.
36. I got that wrong. When you were 35, you were modeling what it looked like to be a 35-year-old.
That's right.
When you were 50, you were modeling what it looked to be a 50-year-old. Now you're older than 50. You're older than 60. Are you still trying to model at your age what it looks like to be your age?
Well, yeah, and you've got instruction in the book of Titus, for instance. Older men are to be dignified, and there's a whole list of other things. So there is an age-appropriate behavior. If you see an older man in an army uniform who's wanting to charge the hill, while you might admire his courage and his zeal, it just doesn't fit. We need young men that are strong and able to endure all the hardships entailed in charging that hill. So there's age-appropriate behavior. The older man might be able to be a great advisor to a younger lieutenant or something like that who needs wisdom, because younger men are in more need for that than they are for just raw strength. So yeah, when you're shepherding, there are appropriate things that you're helping people to do in terms of the application of the gospel in their lives. But it's still the application of the gospel in their lives. You're helping them to live out the gospel in their particular lane. That's what we're trying to do.
I like that military analogy because I think, we're talking about officers here. A lieutenant models what it is to be a lieutenant's typically in his 20s. And then, maybe a lieutenant colonel's maybe in his mid-30s, and that looks different. But then when you advance a 3 or 4-star general, he's not going to model what it looks like to be a lieutenant, but he's got the most experience, the most wisdom, the most responsibility that he's ever had. And he's got to model that for the lieutenants on up. It seems like that's what being a Christian is, modeling that at your appropriate age.
I think so. I think that's right. And when it comes to shepherds in the church, there are some general standards that apply to all age of shepherds. And, 1 Timothy chapter 3, Titus chapter 1 gives those basic categories. They need to be above reproach or blameless in terms of how they manage their families. We call it the happy wife test at Christ Memorial. They need to be above reproach, blameless in how they conduct their personal lives or personal character. And then they need to be able to handle the word, above reproach in gospel fidelity. And that has to be true no matter what age somebody is, a young elder or a more senior saint elder. But it's going to still look different at those different ages.
I wonder if we might zero in on those older ages, those maybe what we call retirement age. Before we do that, you're pretty good at history. You have a good sense of things, Wes. Help me understand where this idea of retirement in America came from. How long ago did retirement become a thing where we're looking at it and going, gee whiz, you're at retirement age. It's time to kick back a bit, stop working, and really people, they have the goal of their whole life to someday retire.
Yeah. There's probably a sense in which it's not a new thing at all. Some point when you aren't pressing like you did. But there can be no doubt that when the Social Security Administration was created in the Roosevelt era, and that's Franklin Roosevelt, the 30s, the New Deal era, and ages were set. And for years and years and decades, that age was 65 when your maximum benefits kicked in. You'll notice that's been creeping up. So now I think it's between 67 and 68. And if you wait till you're 70, when I turned 70 in September, my Social Security benefits take a nice jump. I haven't collected any Social Security benefits at this point. I think that has probably been the most specific determiner of this idea. When can you get Social Security? And that got all established in the 30s when there was a specific age. Prior to that, while the idea of retirement isn't new, I don't think that was nearly as specific in our minds as it is now. And in some countries, you have to retire. In Cameroon, the pastors have to retire at 65. I know in some of the European countries, there's mandatory retirement. There's just no question about it. Now they're wrestling because their system is not supporting as early a retirement, and so they're trying to press that age out a little bit just so they can financially do it. But yeah, I think that's probably in America what's driven it more than anything is everything to do with Social Security.
How have you looked at your own idea of retirement, Wes? I'm curious how you think of that.
I have no concept of it. First of all, I like what I'm doing. I think part of retirement probably plays into people doing jobs that they're not that keen on. I also think, though, there's this American dream idea of, I've got my bucket list, and these are things I've always wanted to do. I think they're all overrated, terribly overrated, but I don't begrudge anybody wanting to do that. I'm doing what I want to do. I want to continue to be useful to the kingdom, and it just so happens that I've got a nice outlet here with Nets to do that and to continue. I'm going to be a part of a church plant in 4 months. And, it's fun to be able to continue to be active in ministry. But yeah, I'm not really thinking about that because I like what I'm doing. I like my job. Sue and I like what we're doing. Now, we'll slow down a little bit. We want to do more things with our grandkids. And by God's grace, we've got grandkids here locally, and then we have a passel of them there in Texas. But our life is not our grandkids. Our life is not our kids. Our life is the gospel. And I think getting clarity on the gospel is the number one thing across the age spectrum to keep us vibrant, to keep us motivated, to keep us hopeful, to keep us from being complacent and apathetic, to keep us from being entitled. All of those things are directly hit head on by a good, clear, robust shepherding ministry that sees preaching and teaching and counseling and modeling the gospel as their key job description.
What do you see as focused on the gospel looking like for someone when they start to reach those quote-unquote retirement years, those 60s and even 70s and maybe beyond?
Yeah. Well, let's say that they follow the traditional pattern of retiring at 65 or somewhere in that vicinity, which I am not poo-pooing that at all. I don't want someone to come away and say he's against retirement. I'm not against retirement if it looks like you're going from this to that. And that is now you're in a position to devote more time to gospel ministry probably than you ever have been in your life, and you're smarter than you've ever been. And assuming there's no debilitating health issues, you're more available to do all kinds of stuff. So in my mind, it's really a change of full-time orientation. And now, boy, am I available to help my church. Am I available to help a ministry like Nets? I'm available to contribute like I've never contributed because, at least potentially, the kids' college is all dealt with. You've married off all the daughters. You're in a position where your discretionary income is pretty high. So I think that we're wanting to really be clear in those ages what our job is and what the gospel demands of us.
Wes, when you send guys out from Nets to revitalize a church, and often churches that are being revitalized have a lot of older saints.
Yes.
How do you instruct those men to shepherd those older saints in those years, especially coming in with a revitalization mentality where things aren't going to be
right
like they've been?
Yes. The answer is no differently than shepherding new and younger folk that might come in with this caveat. The caveat is, obviously, you have to have realistic expectations of older saints. If you're around older folk, they're going to have more physical ailments. They're not going to have the physical stamina that a younger person would have. There's certain physical things they just can't do. But given willingness to make those kinds of adjustments, I think what you're trying to do is help them to live out these years with the same kind of gospel commitment that they had when they were younger. I mean, Jesus says, and I think this is a perfectly legitimate definition of saving faith, whoever wants to save his life shall lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's shall save it. So we're trying to help all the members of our church lose their lives for Christ's sake. And I think it gets tempting when you're older and you've put in your time to think, now I can maybe save a little of my life. And I think you're challenging them. Paul says this in Romans chapter 12. He says, I urge you, therefore, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies, your life to God as a living, holy, and well-pleasing sacrifice. This is the nature of true worship. He says, and this is your spiritual service of worship. So we're trying to help older saints to worship just like younger saints. And that means presentation. We're priests who are presenting ourselves as sacrifices. Here, God, take my life, that old hymn, and let it be consecrated, Lord, to thee. Here, take my silver, take my gold, my hands, my feet, take my life at this age where I do have some debilitations, admittedly, and allow me to be a pleasing aroma to you as I sacrifice myself in emulation of my Savior. His sacrifice was a pleasing aroma, Ephesians 5 says, to God. We want to be that. And so I think a good shepherd is helping them do that in their particular context and based on their particular capacities. But it's no different. It's the same gospel. We're preaching the same gospel, and that gospel demands that we lay down our lives, we take up our cross daily and follow him. There's no exceptions to that demand because of age or station in life.
Wes, I think a lot of people, rightfully so, they spend their whole life getting ready for those years where it's not so easy to make money because they're getting older, because it's a little harder. And sometimes, even if you want to work, you get shoved out the door sometimes. So they're trying to be financially secure. How do you counsel, as a pastor, how do you counsel folks, when is enough enough? And when is it time to maybe back off from the job of making money to the job of maybe now is the time to do more for the church?
Yeah. I think the first question is, what is it that people are preparing for? And I think you could break it down into two categories. Some are preparing. I think the assumption is we're to prepare kind of for the good life when we retire. It's back to bucket list kinds of thinking. I think that's the default setting that most people have. And it feels like that's the just reward for a life well lived. So that's one thing you could prepare for. I think I take umbrage with that. I think we're preparing always for the same thing. We're preparing to serve Christ. And those are probably two financially different scenarios. I'm not saying there aren't common ingredients to those two goals, but this one is going to take a lot more money. It's way more expensive to figure out all the things you think you should be able to do when you're retired and then pursue those things, as opposed to how can I serve at this stage of my life? So I think the appropriate orientation to retirement is how can I continue to be a living, holy, and well-pleasing sacrifice to Christ at this phase of my life? I want to prepare for that. I still think that requires prudence, that requires good stewardship. All those things are still in the mix, but it's a pretty different goal. It's kind of like, have you ever watched a football game, Rob, where somebody has run the ball back? Usually it's a defensive lineman who recovered a fumble. It might be a cornerback who got an interception. They got so excited and he got to the 5-yard line and he spiked the ball at the 5-yard line. Those are some of the funniest videos, especially if he ran a really long way. He has to be on oxygen by the time he gets done. And he fumbled it at the 5-yard line on purpose because he thought he was already in the end zone. I think that's kind of what we're dealing with here. I'm not in the end zone yet. I'm still alive. So I can't pursue retirement as if I cross the goal line. No, the goal line is death. And until I cross that goal line, the command is clear. Present yourselves as a living and holy and well-pleasing sacrifice. So that's what I should be preparing for. It's okay to transition from whatever I was working, especially if I wasn't that keen on the job, to this new reality. But it's not okay to transition from presenting myself as a sacrifice and not presenting myself as a sacrifice. I'm not owed anything in this life. Jesus says we're unworthy slaves. By serving, we've only done that which we ought to have done. And so I think it's a mindset of understanding what Jesus expects. And quite frankly, when people get to this stage and they're just tired, they feel sort of strung out, I think it's because they're starting to be tempted maybe to spike the ball at the 15-yard line. And they're thinking about how nice it would be to stop running. No, I got 15 more yards before I get to the goal line. You can't stop running here. And I know you're feeling like you'd like to, but first of all, the Lord will strengthen you. You'll mount up with wings like eagles, all that good stuff out of Isaiah 40. Lord, strengthen me in the inner man. And I think what's happening is people are starting to not want to run the race anymore. And then life gets tiring. It's just kind of a chore. So I think we've got to reactivate our faith and say, oh, wait a minute, here's what Christ has called me to do, and he wants me to get the end so I can say with Paul, I've run the race, I've finished the race, I've fought the good fight. Now the crown, I'm looking forward to the crown of righteousness, but not before. That's what God has called us to do, all of us, no exceptions.
It sounds like you're saying we need to deny ourselves this entitlement mentality of what is to come while we're still here on earth. It's now time. It's me time. It's time for me to enjoy what I've been working so hard for.
Yeah, I am saying that. Heaven is not on earth, and heaven is heaven. And so while we're on earth, we are in travail, and we're working hard to build up Christ's church. And yeah, it's going to look different. It may not be as intense just because of the physical abilities, but the spirit should be the same. And Rob, from churches, when you've got an older saint that's all in, that so motivates other people. We have a dear friend. I know you know who I'm thinking about. He's almost 80 years old. He's all in. And he so inspires the younger saints. It's not by virtue of his output. It's by virtue that he's still in the game. He's still sprinting down the field. He's not looking to spike the ball at all. And he won't until the Lord finally calls him home. And that alone is worth its weight in gold, not to mention all the intellectual capital that older saints bring to the game. And to not be generously disseminating that is negligent. It's criminal. The kind of wisdom you get over years. What is wisdom? It is the accumulation of all the mistakes you've made, and you've learned a few things. Farmers insurance. I've seen a thing or two, so I know a thing or two, and I've made those mistakes. I know what not to do. The church needs that. The younger women, the younger men need that from the older women and older men. And so there's a huge need for the older saints to stay in the game, to keep fighting the good fight. And the younger folk are the eternal beneficiaries of that.
Yeah, those older saints can be the most encouraging and the most inspiring people in the church.
Yes, they can. And especially you got an older saint that's got some sort of, disease, and they watch how they process that by faith. That is so inspiring to younger people when they see that. I mean, it inspires older people too, but there is so much that those folk can do. So I think it's a matter of transitions without letting go of what's critical. What's critical and what shepherds have to do is continue to encourage those older saints. And a lot of them don't need encouraged. They're all over it. But to continue to encourage those older saints to preach and teach and counsel and model the gospel to the best of their ability until the Lord finally calls them home.
I witnessed something this last Sunday that was so encouraging. And we're talking about somebody, it was actually two different people, making their way to the pew to sit down with a walker. And they're quite a bit older. And the most they can do is get to the pew. It's an effort. Oh, it almost brings me to tears. Like nothing is going to keep them.
That's right.
They're going to come to church. They're going to worship.
They're
going to learn. They're going to pray.
That's right.
I'm like, I was so inspired.
That's right. It's very inspiring. And, you see that and you're like, Lord, when I'm their age, may I have that zeal. And that modeling of the gospel alone is worth its weight in gold.
As people get older, I think they probably start to see, I'm starting to see it at my age, you're starting to break down. And the idea that you're not going to live forever becomes very real. Very real.
You don't think we're going to live forever?
Not in this body.
Okay. All right.
I feel like sometimes it can be helpful to break down because you start to really face the reality that, you've only got so much time here on this side of heaven to serve. It seems like it's a good reminder sometimes as we break down to go, hey, this is my time. I've still got the ability to do this or this, and it's time to engage.
Yeah. Well, I agree. I think you can be tempted to feel like that breakdown is somehow signifying that it's time to stop. But just from your interest in sports, an interest we share, that some of the most inspiring athletes are the ones who play injured. And they're injured. Everybody remembers Kirk Gibson hitting that home run when he couldn't hardly even walk. And they brought him up as a pinch hitter, and he cinched it. And he hobbled around the bases, and you're just like, he's doing the best he can, and he's not using his injury as an excuse. And we have something of transcendent and infinite value to pursue, which is the building up of the Church of Jesus Christ. And let's keep hobbling. Whatever we're able to do, let's do it. And God will use that for his glory.
Wes, when does it, do you think, become sinful to chase this American retirement dream? There's a culture in America. I mean, just go onto YouTube and type in retirement. There's a million videos about how to get to the $1 million mark on your 401k.
I see.
The golden 55 age when you could start tapping in and not being, paying penalties. It's all over the place.
I see.
I wonder when you think it's sinful for a Christian to be, pursuing that American dream of retirement.
Yeah, it's an easy question to answer. Maybe not to apply, but in terms of a shepherding role, but the answer, it's when it starts to impinge or dull your zeal to present yourself as a living and holy and acceptable offering to God, sacrifice to God. Anything that's dumbing that down, anything that's diluting that, anything that's sort of weaning you away from that. And I think that's what retirement can do. It can be very idolatrous because, gosh, there's a sense in which who wants to get up in the morning? I got up at 5 a.m. this morning, and boy, when that alarm went off, I'm like, you start thinking of all the ways you can somehow avoid your responsibility. But I couldn't this morning. I was taking somebody to the airport. But the devil knows it's more tempting when you're older to want to kind of unplug. It's just more tempting. You just don't have the natural fire in your belly. You got to work harder at saying, here's who I am, and this is what God's will is for me. So I think you're looking at threats to losing your life and those things that are wooing you to preserve a part of your life instead of yielding it all up and saying, not my will, but thy will be done. Anything that's challenging that, threatening that, it has to be dealt with ruthlessly.
Wes, I want to push back on this a little bit.
Okay.
I really do.
How's your 401k?
My 401k is, we don't want to talk about that. So you've been blessed and, it's been strategic. You've had a job your whole life that I think you've been incredibly devoted to, that you've really enjoyed and feel really called to. Some of us don't have that kind of job. Some of us have worked really hard, very regimented jobs where we have to work day in and day out, and we are sacrificing to take care of our families, to do something we don't even, it's not like we don't enjoy it. We hate it. And it's finally time to cash in with the Social Security, the 401k, the pension, whatever it is. Isn't it time to change things up and maybe, live for yourself a little bit?
Well, until you said that last phrase, I didn't really have any trouble with what you were saying. When you threw in the kicker, live for yourself a little bit, that's the only time I feel some pushback. But let me back up to the premise, because if you're in a church as a younger person and you're hating your job and you're not being shepherded through that whole thing, someone's dropped the ball. Let's say you're in your 30s, early 40s, you hate your job. In my mind, a good shepherd, a good shepherding board would take you aside and say, let's problem solve. There's really one of two things. Number one, we need to accept this is the role that God has given us. And if we're hating it, then we're hating God's will. And we got to make some adjustments here, which doesn't mean it has to become the best thing you could have ever imagined. I mean, I eat Brussels sprouts, but if I have some choices, I'd rather eat other things. I don't hate them, though. I eat them, and I eat them fairly cheerfully. So an attitude adjustment, or you make a change. That's the advice of 1 Corinthians 7. If you have an opportunity to change your station in life, do it. So a good shepherd would come around and say, let's really problem solve here so that you don't get to age 65 and just loathe your existence. Because what you've done is you've just spit on God's will for your whole life. Here's what obviously the Lord had you do, and you never got your mind around it or never faced the reality that you could change it. But still, you get to the age of retirement and, you don't want to continue to do this. Like I said, there's no tension with deciding to not do this every day. But the transition isn't a transition to a me-centered existence. It's a transition to serving Christ and serving his church in perhaps a different way. You can never insert the, a little time for me. Now, that doesn't mean you can't do enjoyable things that you might not have been able to do with the structure you had before that. But it still doesn't turn out to a little time for me. So let's say you decide you're going to go on a cruise. You never were able to do that while you were working, paying the man. And you go on one of these Caribbean cruises or who knows what it is. Well, what's my role in that context? I'm still an ambassador for Christ. This isn't like me time. I'm not going to identify with Christ. I'm not going to care that the boat is filled with people for right now who are headed for destruction with their fingers in their ears, just having a gay old time. No, I belong to Christ. He said, whoever loses his life for my sake in the Gospels. Okay, now I get a chance to lose my life on the cruise ship. It's not a different job description. Yeah, I didn't get to do a cruise ship, and yeah, cruise ship might be kind of fun. Some people really enjoy that kind of thing, but the role hasn't changed. Nothing's changed. Or you say, well, it's going to be all about my grandkids. Okay, well, go visit your grandkids. But when you are with your grandkids, what are you doing with your grandkids? Are you sharing the gospel with your grandkids? And when you take them to the zoo or whatever you do, are you being a good witness in that context? Are they seeing a godly grandfather who loves Christ supremely, loves his grandkids, but wants to model the gospel to them? The job description is unchanged. And I think that's what a good shepherd is trying to help. He goes into a revitalization scenario. He's trying to create, if it's not already there, that gospel culture and rekindle that with oodles of patience, because he just can't go in and, guns a-blazing. But we're going to be about the gospel. I'm going to preach the gospel. I'm going to counsel the gospel. I'm going to teach you the rudiments of the gospel. And by God's grace, I'm going to model that gospel. We're going to become a gospel-centered church. Who's with me? And you just work the territory. You visit these older saints, and a lot of those older saints are dear saints. They're going to be right with you. But sometimes they're just tired. So you kind of have to rekindle the passion and help them to be reawakened to the glory of God in Jesus Christ, in the face of Christ, which is displayed in the gospel.
Wes, what do you say to the guy out there, woman out there that's maybe they've worked hard, they're financially secure, and maybe for the first time in their life that they can remember, they are freed up to pursue other things besides that regimented job that they've got to do every single day. But on top of that, Wes, they say, I'm tired. I'm just burnt out.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things you have to always ask as a shepherd, is somebody open to hearing from me? And if you go into a church revitalization and you're 32 years old and you've got someone who's near 70, you've got some challenges there, understandably. But assuming they're open to hearing that, I think you want to help them understand the rudiments of burnout. I'm convinced that burnout is a mental issue, and it issues forth primarily from the tension of continually doing something that you don't want to do. And you keep doing it and you keep doing it. And maybe you think that's what you have to do. But again, we're back to the other scenario. Okay, I have to problem solve this. I'm in a position of perpetual dissonance where I'm doing what I don't want to do. So I've got two choices. And so you're first of all trying to analyze the burnout. What was the analysis of your situation? Because it sounds like you perpetuated an unhealthy situation. But we don't have to perpetuate that anymore. We can right now address that situation and bring together what you are doing with what you want to do. And we have the manual. It's called the Bible. What you want to do should be to pursue the glory of God. And if that's not what you want to do, now we have a bigger discussion. And that discussion is, who's really your Lord? Who do you really care for? Who are you really living for? Have you really lost your life the first time? And again, you can't just, bust down the door of some senior citizen in your church and get all, swagger like that. But slowly but surely, you're bringing them back to the gospel. Because if the gospel is not directing what they want to do, there's a bigger issue that has to be addressed. But if that spark is still there, now you're trying to help them to understand, well, what you then are to do is not this bucket list stuff. What you are to do is get back on the gospel horse and ride for all you're worth. And even as you pursue some of these fun things that you can do now at this stage of life, you're doing it as a gospel man. You're not doing it as a guy that can't be distinguished from your typical secular guy out there. So you're bringing them back to the gospel. And if they have that true gospel spark, they're going to appreciate that. Maybe not immediately, but eventually they're going to see, okay, this man loves me and he's helping me to recalibrate because I'm a little out of sync.
All right, well, what about the opposite of that in a way? What if I love my job? Maybe I'm financially secure, but I love my work. Maybe I'm in my 60s and I'm just making more money, Wes, than I've ever made before because I'm quite good at what I do. And I've taken my lumps and now I'm finally I'm killing it. But I don't need to work. Do I just keep doing what I've been doing? Or do you encourage folks to maybe, hey, you don't need to be continuing to add to that retirement? Because some folks really work hard. They want to leave a lot of money behind when they're moving on.
Yep. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to that. If they want to continue to work, most wives would say they like it when their husband's working. When the husband retires, a lot of times that produces problems. The last 40 years, 50 years, she's used to him not being there during the day so she can sort of organize her life the way she wants to. And now suddenly he's around and he seems to have an opinion on everything. But if he wants to continue working and he's been serving Christ faithfully in that particular lifestyle, why would you want to interrupt that? Now, if he has more money than he's had before, you might shepherd and say, there's more opportunities now than you've ever had before. And, let me shepherd that a little bit if there's an openness to that. But I don't see any reason, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And if this has worked and he's been a faithful servant of the church while he's been working, and probably that kind of guy, if he has been, is going to recognize I've got more money to give now and I want to give more money. So usually those things take care of themselves. So no, I wouldn't be trying to lobby him so he can go on a mission trip or something like that. I mean, that's not important, but he's probably a real financial staple of the church and a blessing for that reason. And the number of missionaries that are being supported because he's good at what he does, that's worth its weight right there. So,
shifting a little bit from the retirement idea, but still staying with that age group, but staying with shepherding. How are you shepherding older couples? Because I'm always thinking about when you're counseling or shepherding couples, they're younger, they've got kids in the house, or they're newlyweds. But what is it like to shepherd older couples, and what are you trying to help them do as a married couple at that stage in life? Because you said, things change. Now all of a sudden, the husband's maybe around more, or you just get maybe a little more cranky. I don't know.
Yeah. And I don't want to represent having a ton of experience doing this, but by that time, the concrete's pretty cured. The couples are what they are. And I think there's just a lot of encouragement that's given and helping them to help each other as they live out those twilight years. But don't think you're going in there and doing marriage counseling. I don't think you're going in there and trying to change the paradigm at this point. It's just pretty well set, and you just work with that and give them opportunities to serve. If you have questions about whether they're clear about the faith, obviously you might go in a little deeper. I've done that with some older couples where I've been concerned and really had, in my mind, heart-to-heart talks about, are we really clear about what we're talking about here? But in general, I think you just encourage them, give them venues in which they can bless the church and recognize that they're kind of what they are. And they'll have their idiosyncrasies, and you just kind of roll with that. We have ours too. They just get a little more amplified, I think, when you're older.
Wes, do we have a responsibility to leave something behind for our children financially?
I'm not sure we have a responsibility. Proverbs talks about, the blessing of a grandfather leaving something for his grandkids. But responsibility, I'd probably stop short of that. I do think we have a responsibility to be generous, and our kids and their kids are a good avenue for that. But I think modeling generosity to the church is more important than just making sure that, they have enough to buy their own home when we pass on. So I think it's a both and, but I would want to have my kids be clear that to live for Christ is to live for Christ's church, and to see that and to realize that was without being stingy or selfish at all. I think we should be very generous to our kids, but it's about Christ and it's about his church. That's where the passion is.
So for a final word, Wes, I wondered if you just might share what you would tell a group of folks that are maybe 55, 60, 65, 70, 75, that does feel tired, that does feel maybe it is a little bit of me time. They love the Lord, they love his church, but they're feeling worn out.
Yeah. I'd say go back to basics. The basics are that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. And here's what it means to believe in him. Here's what it means to walk by faith and not by sight. It means presenting yourself as a living and holy and well-pleasing sacrifice. It means offering yourself up as a fragrant aroma. And all we need to do now is rekindle that. For some reason, that's a little out of focus. We need to bring that back into focus and take joy in the fact that we have the inestimable privilege to do that because God has loved us with an everlasting love. And we have the opportunity, we are free to serve one another in love. We're free to lay down our lives for the church. We're free to help spread the glory of the knowledge of God over the earth and cover the earth with it like the waters cover the sea. We're free to continue to do that. We got to get back in line with God's holy agenda. And I'd be wooing them to go back to those basics and see where something's a little out of whack.
And then bring it down to them individually.
That's right. Then bring it down to them individually. Let's talk this through. This fatigue is not a mark of healthy faith. Let's try to triage here where we can kind of get back on track. God expects you to be zealous. Zeal for thy house, Jesus said, consumed me. He wants his followers to be zealous for the house of God.
That's a great word to end on. Wes, thanks for this conversation. I hope some folks out there find it helpful.
You're welcome. And after this conversation, I'm really tired, Rob.
Me too. To learn more about the Net Center for Church Planning and Revitalization's training and sending programs, visit us online at thenetcenter.org. For questions or comments, email us at pastorpastor@thenetcenter.org. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe and consider sharing this episode with a friend. This podcast is a production of the Net Center for Church Planning and Revitalization. Nets, for the life of the church.